In this video, I wanted to talk about fishing inlets and passes and bridges using Flair Hawk jigs. These are very effective lures for catching big snook, tarpon, redfish, black drum, grouper, all sorts of fish around bridges, passes, and inlets. So we're going to talk about lure selection, or actually color selection rather, also size, how heavy should you go, profile, what you can do to adjust the profile of these lures, and also I have a couple rigs or combos, spinning reel setups that I want to show you that I use depending on the situation. So we're going to take a look at that. Now when you get to the end of this video, if you did enjoy it, please be sure to give it a like and also subscribe to our channel, where we put out videos on a daily basis, anything from product reviews and unboxings to fishing tips to help you catch more inshore fish. So first, let's talk about color selection. There are really only two colors I bring with me, and the color is going to highly depend on which tide you are fishing. So these are the two colors that I will typically bring. I will bring a white Flair Hawk jig. Tail color doesn't really matter too much in my opinion. And then I will bring a chartreuse colored jig. And again, tail color, not really too important in my opinion. So as far as the colors go, this is really going to depend on the tide. If it's an outgoing tide, I like to stick with the bright colors. Chartreuse, you can use a pink, orange. Any of those bright colors are going to stand out much better in dirty water, because with an outgoing tide, that water is going to be very murky. It's going to be muddy because it's pulling all of that inshore water, that water that's been in the backwaters, in the rivers, in the bays. It's pulling all that dirty water out. So the water is going to be churned up a lot more, and it's going to be very murky. So that is why I go with the brighter colors on an outgoing tide. Now just the opposite, if I'm fishing an incoming tide, you have to understand with an incoming tide that water is going to be much cleaner coming into the inlet or pass and around the bridges. So you want to go with something that looks a little bit more natural, a little bit more subtle. You don't want to go with those really bright colors because the fish will be on edge. They'll get a really good look at it and they most likely won't bite it. So I go with more natural colors such as white, and it works really well again on an incoming tide. Now another thing that's going to come into play that's going to affect your color selection is if you're fishing at night and how bright it is at night. If it's a full moon or if it's a new moon. Full moon, you're going to have a lot of light out there. It's going to help the fish see better. So you really don't have to go with these more brighter colors at night if there's a full moon. But if you're fishing a full moon and the water is very murky and stirred up, I would still go with the chartreuse or the pink or the orange or those more brighter colors. And then again, if it's a full moon, incoming tide, and the water's pretty clean, go with that white color or that more natural color. And same thing, if it's even not a full moon and the water's very clear, I would still go with that white presentation because it will pick up the flash better in that clear water if there is any type of light. If you're fishing a bridge and there's some lights overhead, they will help shine on that white skirt, so that can definitely help. Now next is the size selection. How heavy should these jigs be? I typically go no less than about 1.5 ounces and no more than about 3 to 4 ounces. And the weight is really going to depend on how strong the current is and how deep you're fishing. You want to get these down to the bottom. If you're not, I like to say, if you're not fishing the bottom, you're not putting these in the fish's face and you're going to miss a lot of fish. Another thing I highly recommend going out with at least a dozen jigs if you are going out for a trip, because you will lose them on structure on the bottom. Because if you're not fishing on the bottom, you're not hanging up on structure, you're not fishing where the fish are at. So make sure you bring plenty of these jigs. What I've been doing recently is getting some from a local guy in town that makes them. These are from Thump Junkie Jigs. They're based out of Melbourne, Florida, down on the east coast of Florida. And they sell them for a really good price. You can get a dozen for about 20 bucks of the 2 ounce. So a really good deal on that. You just have to let them know ahead of time if you do find someone local that can make some jigs for you. So again, going back to the weight selection, about 2 ounce is my preferred weight. Seems to get the job done no matter what the current's doing, but if it's a really, really strong current and you make a cast and then your bait is 100 yards down the inlet or pass and it hasn't touched the bottom yet, you're going to want to go with at least a 3.5, or maybe 4 ounce. So make sure you have a few different weights available, everything from 1.5 ounce up to about, again, 3 to 4 ounce. So now really quick, let's go ahead and talk about some rigging tips as far as rigging these up. It's very simple. What I like to have with me is anywhere from 30 to 60 pound leader. Mono or fluoro, all depends on what your preference is. I've been using mono recently just because it seems to be more abrasion resistant, especially with snook that have the very rough mouths and they can rub through your leader material. But again, mono, fluoro, personal preference. If anything that I think helps get a strike is going to be the size or the diameter of your line. So again, 30 to 60 pound. If those fish are being very finicky, you're not getting any strikes, try bumping down to 30 pound. And if you start getting strikes, then you know the fish are there. They're just being very finicky. So again, that's why I like to go with different leader sizes, have a few options available. Now I tie on about 2 to 2.5 feet of that leader using a uni to uni knot on my braid, and I'll talk about my rigs here in a second as far as rod, reel, and line. But then I attach the jig using a loop knot, and that loop knot actually allows for some freedom of movement, not so much for the action of the jig, but if you happen to get snagged, you can sort of bounce that lure or that jig around much better and get it unsnagged, as opposed to having a knot on there that's really snug to the eye, and then if you go to pull on it, it's not really going to bounce around and allow it to come free. So again, use that non-slip loop knot. Definitely helps if these do get snagged on the bottom. So now let's go ahead and talk about the setups that I use. This is my lighter setup. I use this mainly if I'm throwing jigs in the 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 ounce range. And this is a 7'10" Century weapon. This is custom made by Black Pelican Custom Rods. I had it custom made by them. And then I have a Tsunami Saltex. This is a 4,000 size reel here, and it's loaded with 30 pound braid. It has 270 yards of 30 pound braid on here, so plenty of line. That 30 pound braid is really good to haul fish away from structure, but if I'm fishing a little heavier, let's say I need to use some heavier jigs, or I'm fishing, bridges where I need to get those fish away from that structure, this is the other setup that I use, and this is an 8-foot star rod. This is a Stellar Light. The model is the SG1 530 S80, and it's rated for lures in the 5/8 to 3 ounce range. So this is my heavier setup. Call this the meat stick, the beef stick. Helps pull those fish away. And then I have a Tsunami Shield here. This is a 5,000, and I have, it depends on the situation, but I have 40 pound braid on here. If I'm fishing an area that's going to have really heavy structure and bigger fish, I'll put 50 pound braid on there. Again, if I'm fishing really heavy structure and I want to pull those fish away, or if I'm using those 2.5, 3 to 4 ounce jigs. So that will wrap up this video on some tips for selecting and rigging up Flair Hawk jigs when fishing inlets, passes, and bridges. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, if you have any additional tips you would like to share when it comes to fishing these types of jigs in those types of areas, definitely let us know down below. Now also, if you are one of our Insider Club members, I do have some reports where I'm on the water using these at inlets and passes, show you exactly where I'm at, what I'm doing to catch more fish. And if you're not an insider, definitely be sure to check that out because you're missing out on some really good information. So thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you on the next video.